I'll begin. So good afternoon, everyone, and very warm welcome to you all joining us today at our Thoughtful Thursday session. My name's Aisling. I'll be hosting today's session. For anyone who is joining us today who doesn't know us, we're Irish in Britain, and we're a network charity supporting a number of organisations and groups that serve the Irish community throughout Britain, supporting their growth and their work. I'll be hosting today's session, so before I hand over to my colleague and our speakers for today, I'm just going to run through some housekeeping. So all participants, you're on mute and your cameras are off, and this session is being recorded and will be uploaded onto our website as a learning resource. So you're on mute, but you can, and we do encourage contributions and questions throughout the session, which you can post either in the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen or the chat box, and I'll be monitoring that throughout. We will hold space for questions and answers towards the end of the session. So we like to email everybody about our upcoming events, but if anyone doesn't wish to be emailed about any of these events, if you could just drop me a line in the chat box, you can write to me directly or you can send me an email. And I think that's probably it for housekeeping. So what I'll do now is hand over to Zibby, who's our Cuimhne coordinator. She'll speak briefly and then hand over to our speakers for today. Just bring you in there, Zibby.
Thank you. Welcome to everybody, and a very warm welcome to friends and colleagues and members of Irish in Britain, as well as new people joining us for the first time today. This is a Thoughtful Thursday that we organise under our Cuimhne programme in our charity. Cuimhne is the Irish word for memory, and today we're delighted to be having a reminiscence session together with three guests, Tom Scanlon, Declan, Finnegan and Paddy Ryan, who are going to be talking today about life working on the buses in different capacities. And we're also joined today by our Cuimhne patron, Dr. Mary Tilkey, who will be helping to ask questions to our three guests. I'm going to introduce them one by one. So I'm going to start with Tom. Tom, I know, was born in County Clare, and he came over after working in Ennis and in Dublin to London in 1966, and he's had all sorts of experiences seeking accommodation in London, and joined initially London Transport as a conductor in 1967. So I'm going to hand over to Tom to ask Tom if you'd like to introduce yourself a bit more and about the different roles that you've had within the bus industry.
Thank you, and good afternoon, everybody. Well, yes, my name is Tom Scandan, and I come from a place called Cuimhne, County Clare, which is a couple of miles from Ennis. It's actually 8 miles from Ennis, and when I went to work in Ennis, I had to cycle from Cuimhne to Ennis to work. So I decided to move to Dublin, and then from Dublin in 1966, I come over to London. I found accommodation at the Archway, and there were two bus garages right beside me. It was Holloway and Highgate, and I thought, well, in January I thought, well, went to Griffith's house, applied for a job as a conductor, and I got the job, and I thought, well, I either be going to Holloway, it'd be a short walk, but they referred me to North Finchley, which is London N12, and it was a beginning of a life experience for me. I went further on to be trained as a driver. I couldn't drive when I couldn't come to London, and I went on as a driver and got involved. One of the things as part of the contract was that you actually become a member of the trade union, and it was what was known that time as a closed shop. So I did that, and I got involved with the trade union, because if you wanted to change anything, that was the way you did it. If you wanted to talk to the garage manager, you couldn't. You had to go and go through the trade union if you wanted things changed. So I got involved with the trade union, and I was fortunate to be elected to both branch representative, branch secretary, convener and chairperson, and I served for a number of years both locally and regionally on the regional committee and indeed a national committee, and also got very interested in the pensions, and when we started, there wasn't a pension as such. There was an ex gratia scheme, so it was something that lots of people had problems with when they passed away, and their families were left, you know, in quite a state. So I become a trustee of the London Transport Pension Fund for a number of years, in fact 2 sessions, one. And indeed, Finchley closed in 1993, and I moved to Holloway then, and I stayed at Holloway for a year before I was actually appointed regional industrial organizer, or union official for the Transport and General Workers Union. And in that I did again continue to serve, almost doing the same things, but getting paid a little bit more for doing it, and obviously then working with all the people that I knew, and all the shop stewards and all those people in representation. So that really where I was. I retired in 2007. And in 2008, I joined the Luton Irish Forum, and I've been a trustee there since, and I'm currently chair of the Luton Irish Forum. So just, been involved in very much assisting people and helping people all my life. Thank you.
Many thanks, Tom. And now I would like to move over to Paddy. So Paddy was 18 when he came across to London from County Limerick. I know that he joined British Railways, St Pancras Station, as a parcels clerk initially, and then went on to become a conductor for London Transport. And I know that he also got involved in various sports. Paddy, would you like to say something about yourself?
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Paddy Ryan. I come from Limerick, which is about, I suppose, about 50 miles away from where Tom comes from. We're the other side of the Shannon. I came here in 1961, January 1961. I was working on a farm before I came here, usually getting up at 5:30, 6 o'clock in the morning, and milking 6 or 7 cows before we had a milking machine. So it was interesting work, and I decided to make a break, as did 3 other of us in December, just after Christmas, and with 2 girls who had lived here in England were on holiday, and the 5 of us came back here to London together. I was fortunate, and a cousin of mine, to have a cousin here, and she looked after us, and she actually found us temporary accommodation with a friend's house who was a bus driver at Finchley, a chap called Don Kane, and he was a great friend of my cousin's, and turned out to be a great friend of mine and others. Anyhow, I went to work on the railway as a glorified porter, basically, but was classed as a parcels clerk, and spent 6 months there until Tom Kane, or Don Kane, asked me, why don't I have a go at the buses? And I did. I went the same road as Tom, Griffith House, went as a conductor, and got through that and came to Wood Green. And I thought it was only going to be a short spell at conducting. And I came there in 1961, and I left there in the same year as Tom retired, 2007. So I spent my whole life basically in and around Wood Green Garage. I was a conductor for 3 years, and again, it's almost a mirror of Tom. I didn't have a car license, and I applied for driving. Didn't have a license, and London Transport trained me as a bus driver. And I came out as a bus driver in 1964, and became promotion, would you believe, to a driver operator in 1968. That was a one-man operation, which carried a little bit more money than a driver, and we're quite pleased with that. And I've written down here, in 1965, I earned £1,000 in a year, and I send the annual pay slip that you get, the P60, I think it's called. I send a copy of that to my mother to say, I'm a rich man, Mum. I've earned £1,000 this year. Because when I started as a conductor, I was getting £10 a week, just under. That was the wages then. Times have changed. Anyhow, I spent a number of years driving and loved it, and got involved in the garage social and sports side. Sport was, well, London Transport was about sport. It wasn't about work. It was all about work was a hobby, basically, and sport was work. And people spend a lot of their life involved in sport. It was absolutely brilliant. Every nationality in the world you could meet took part. Every sport you could mention was there. Believe it or not, you pay something like 5 pence a week into the Sports Association. I joined the Flying Club in 1961. I never saw a plane. I never even saw the airfield, but I joined it because that was the thing that people done. I got heavily involved in sport, and with an Irishman at Green, who was rowing, an excellent rower. He took 4 or 5 of us down the river. And from then, I spent 3 or 4 days a week training, basically rowing. Loved it. I got promotion from that in, when was it? 1984. I completed the GI course. And that was fine, basically. I stuck that for something like 3 months, and I got promoted to an SRI, which is Senior Road Inspector. And then I followed on being a road operating manager. That was all on the roadside. That was an eye-opener. That was brilliant. Things you saw, what you had to do was great. I enjoyed that as well. Became a Palmer's Green AOM in 1967. Sorry, in 87. And then that was the change from garage inspectors to AOMs. And in 2011, I became operating manager at Wood Green and Palmer's Green. The garage, I started off as a conductor in 1961. I finished off as the operating manager there. And by the way, I'd done my training in 1961 on the 641 route, which was a trolley bus route. So I enjoyed every minute of my time working on the buses. It was great. It was one of the nicest occupations I could ever have finished up doing.
Thank you.
Basically, that's it.
Thank you, Paddy. Just before I move on to Declan, for younger participants, could you explain what a trolley bus is?
Well, a trolley bus is what we had in 60. I think they finished in 62. The last trolley buses actually come out of Finchley. The 521s and the 621s used to run from Finchley to Holborn Circus or Farringdon Street. One went down Gray's Inn Road, a 521, and the 621 went down Farringdon Road. It was the same route basically, apart from Farringdon Road and Gray's Inn Road. But a trolley bus was a bus that was driven by electricity on poles that went up into the air and collected the power from that. Cleanest bus that was ever in London, the fastest bus that was ever in London. And now we've gone back to now where we're getting hybrids, which are basically electric buses again. And that was a trolley bus. The only thing about trolley buses were they were very, very cold. You really had to wear heavy coats. That's why at that time we had a summer uniform and a winter uniform just to take care of the cold you put up in the winter time on the trolley buses.
Thank you, Paddy. Now I'm going to introduce Declan, who joined London Transport in 1972 as a bus conductor in Willesden, and later he was promoted to become an inspector, and he worked in various roles and then senior management grades as well. And when he retired, he had become the delivery director at Metroline. And I'm going to ask Declan if you could introduce yourself now.
Yeah, hiya. I'm Dec Finnegan, and I come from Wicklow, Wicklow Town in County Wicklow. I came over here earlier that year. I'd been working for the civil service in Dublin, but I broke my ankle playing football for the civil service, and then I was involved in a bad car accident, so I hadn't worked for about a year. And I came over here for a bit of a break once I'd finished physiotherapy and that with friends of mine, and intended to go back at Christmas. So about September, I got friendly with quite a few guys. One of them was from Cork, a fella called Paddy Ryan, who was a conductor in Stonebridge, and he said to me, "Why don't you come on the buses for a couple of months?" So, like Pat and Tom, off I go down to Griffith House and was recruited as a conductor. I was intended to go to Stonebridge because I only lived in Craven Park, which was up the road, but they sent me to Wilson, which I'd never even heard of, even though it was only down the road from us. So away I went, and yeah, I went down there, stayed until Christmas, went home, come back, and you know, you've gone through some of it. The rest is sort of history. I mean, I suppose the key changer for me was that I actually met my wife, who was also a bus conductor in Wilson, and we were there together for about 5 years. She went off then to work at head office. I was a bus conductor until 1979 when I got promoted to inspector, and went through the very became a gold badge road operating manager, garage manager, area manager. Ended up then being asked to form when we went to contracting services, which was a completely different regime to what we all joined with, where performance and delivery was crucial, particularly as the companies have become privatized and were working on a contract basis. So I was asked to head up the service delivery department, and which I did. I had about 250 people at one stage working for me, and as I say, was appointed as service delivery director for Metroline, and I did that job until I retired in April 2016. I went back to do part-time for 1 day a week. My boss had asked me to come back and do something completely different to what I had been doing. I went back for 1 day a week, supposed to be for 6 months, ended up staying for 17 months, I think. But then in 2019, then I finished up completely, and been enjoying life ever since.
Thank you, Declan, and thank you to everybody. Now, we would like to spend our session asking some questions to all of you, and encouraging those of you who are listening in, viewing from different places, including Wood Green, I can see, and including Luton and Watford and different places around the country. Please do feel free to type your questions into the chat and we'll put them to our guests. A first question I'd like to ask to all of you, perhaps we'll stick with the same order, so starting with Tom, is can you talk a little bit about the kinds of first impressions you had of London when you arrived? You all came across from Ireland, arrived in London. What did some of you have spoken about, perhaps not necessarily intending to stay long, and you were quite young at the time when you arrived. Tom, you arrived in 1966. What was it like coming from Ireland to London at that time? What were your first impressions of London?
Well, apart from being totally lost, I was quite close to the Gresham when we were at the Archway, so we could pop down and meet all our colleagues from Ireland there. There would be a big queue, and of course all the pubs down the Holloway Road, there was always music, and so very, very soon it become a bit like Dublin to me, because you could meet people that you knew, and very often you did meet people. And indeed, as a conductor, you often met people from your own. I've met people from my own village going to work, and so that was the impression I had. There were problems, obviously. There were signs in relation to renting, and no dogs, no blacks, no Irish, which was a surprise around the Archway and that area, but it was there, and that obviously was something that you hadn't even thought about back in Ireland, that kind of attitude. And indeed, we become very much involved and engaged with the West Indian and African community, because they were there before us, and many of them helped us out and were very friendly towards us when we turned up as a lost bus conductor. Because I remember my first trip was from Finchley to Hammersmith on the 260s, I absolutely no idea, because you are expected to understand the fares, understand charge the people the right fare. You just did the best you can and kept rolling tickets out till you got to the other end. And thankfully, I had a reasonable driver who was pretty polite to me and took me back to Finchley. When I got back to Finchley, I knew where I was. But that, that was the kind of situation we were in. But there was always people to help you. I think I've mentioned the fact before that it was my family. Once we were there were so many people who were always willing to help and to work with you and to give you advice. And that was the one thing as a conductor, the drivers advised you on how to do and how to look after yourself and how to ensure that you didn't get assaulted, and how you handled passengers, and you weren't rude to them, and you didn't get yourself involved in that kind of arguments and stuff. That we did have a lot of people getting assaulted, which is something we'll come back to later. But I think I'll just leave it at that. Yeah.
Thank you, Tom. And moving to Paddy. Paddy, what were your first impressions arriving in London? And I heard Tom talking about the sense of family, a new kind of family that you joined when you joined the bus community. Is that your experience as well?
Yes, I was fortunate as well. I had a cousin who got me settled in, and two of us got us settled in the first couple of weeks, but it was only temporary. And exactly what Tom has said, I found it strange. The first thing I found strange when I came into Paddington was the orange lighting. I couldn't understand it. I wasn't as well travelled as Tom. Tom was in Dublin. I think I'd been in Dublin once in my life before I came to London, and I probably was in Limerick about 10 times in my life. So I was a country lad. I was out milking cows day and night, and didn't get much opportunities to go, because milking cows is a 7 days a week job. You can't tell the cow, can you give me Saturday and Sunday off and I'll see you on Monday morning. That didn't happen. But yes, it was difficult. There was a discrimination against West Indians in particular, because they were the ones that came before us, and probably Jewish people just before them. And it was interesting how the communities, the West Indian community and the Jewish community, sort of got round people. My long-term stay in a house in Bounds Green was with a Jewish family, and they were absolutely brilliant. Mrs. Gorlick, she was a lovely lady with two daughters. Her husband had died quite sudden, and they were left in this big house, and she found out that we were in a room. There was 4 of us sharing a room, and that was common then. When you got a place, you shared it with 3 or 4 people, one room. Until such time as you could better yourself, and bettering yourself wasn't easy at that time. Yes, it was, but it was the opposite was in the transport. I could not have found any discrimination whatever in the public transport. In actual fact, the garages were like a family outside of family. You had canteens opened 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. When I came there in 1961, you could get a breakfast special for 1 and 3, 1 and 3, which is what, 6.5 pence now. Dinner cost 1 and 6, and you could come in at if you wanted to. If you went out to the pub that night and you'd nothing at home, which most people didn't when they got home to their room, that was it. You could go back to the canteen, and Bert would do you liver, bacon, and chips. That's what the transport was like. It was almost a home from home. I had a problem. I missed home terribly. I really did. I struggled for 2 years, and if I was probably man enough and could have held up to it, I would have gone back, but I didn't, because I was frightened of what might have been said if I did go back. And just to when Mary says something about we've come a long way with technology and the rest of it, I used to write to my parents probably every week or every other week. And then I'd write to him to ask him to know, would I make a phone call? And I'd make it at 9 o'clock on a Sunday night to the post box in the village. And that's where they would go to wait for the phone to ring so we could have a talk. And that was the same with lots of Irish people here. We were fortunate. I was fortunate that I knew somebody and had a relative. The people came over here with nothing, didn't have a friend, of Foe to come to and landed at Paddington or wherever, and had to find their own way. It was bad enough for boys to do that, but it was worse still for girls. If girls came over and did nothing, there was people there who were quite happy to offer them things that probably they would feel sorry for, that they accepted afterwards. So it wasn't easy. It wasn't easy, but I could not have had a bad word said about working in the transport industry. I learned in it. I finished my education in the transport industry that I didn't complete in Ireland.
Thank you, Paddy. And Declan, would you like to share your thoughts?
Yeah, I suppose it's slightly different for me. I'd been to London a couple of times before actually moving over here. But like Paddy said, I had friends here and stayed with them before I sort of start fending for myself. And again, I mean, part of London that I was in was Harlesden, Harrow Road area, which was huge Irish community and West Indian community there. And even before buses, there was great interaction between both communities, particularly socially as well. And of course, then when I went on the buses at Wilson, I mean, Pat has described it perfectly, a bit like home from home, just in terms of the mix of people that there were and how welcoming they were. Funny enough, Tom mentioned meeting people from home. I actually I only met a couple of people over the course of several years that were from my place at home, because although there was immigration from our town, most of them actually went to Liverpool or to Southampton for various different reasons, and there were actually very few who come to London. But as I say, once you got into the way of garage life, and as I said, I met my wife then in about not very long after I joined, about a year, 18 months or so, and it all became, I mean, it was a great life, really. I mean, I have to say, of all the jobs that I did, I probably enjoyed being a bus conductor best of all. It was never 2 days the same. And talking about Tom, I remember the first day that I went out on a Route 176, which was one of the longest routes in London, went from Willesden to Forest Hill in South London. Now, I'd never been south of the Thames ever. So, and what I discovered before we left was it was the driver's first day as well. So we made our way, we got as far as the Elephant and Castle, and then we got lost, totally lost, and completely went off route. Strange thing about it was people were on the bus and not one of them said, "You're going the wrong way." We were going down the Old Kent Road instead of Camberwell Road, but they just wanted to go wherever they were going, and that was quite an experience. But yeah, I mean, the camaraderie between not only among the Irish, but as I say, among the West Indians, and even the English guys, people who were working there. And you know, in Wilson, I'd say that probably if you like to call them the indigenous English, probably formed less than 1/3 of the workforce. Huge Irish community, huge West Indian community working there, and it was I really enjoyed it. And I say, when I went on to get promotion, then I got I call it a leg up, but some really good help and sound advice from two Irish guys who had gone through the ranks, so to speak. One was a guy called Mick Shaughnessy, who was from Dublin, and the other fellow was John Brown from Mayo, and they were really good to me, and sort of, I don't know what it was, said they saw potential or whatever. One of them told me that afterwards, but they gave me a real leg up, which was really the start of my, if you like, deciding that I was going to stay on the buses rather than it just being a job for a while and then move on.
Thank you, Declan. I'm going to bring in Mary now to ask a question.
I want to ask Tom a question. You mentioned you were on the North Finchley to Hammersmith bus route, which I think was the 260. It's still the 260, isn't it? And when we talked before, you actually kind of, you talked about where people were going, taking the women to work and taking people to work in various factories. How good is your memory? Are you able to do a kind of a reminiscence tour of the 260 in the old days?
Well, if I give you, essentially garage, the routes were 125 and the 104 from Barnet Church to Moorgate, and the 221 from Edgware to Turnpike Lane, and from North Finchley to Holborn. Now, our canteen was open all night because we were one of the first night buses, and the reason we were a night bus was because we were taking the cleaning ladies and the printers home. We would take the cleaning ladies down in the morning, 3-4 o'clock. The 221 could leave at 3 o'clock from Finchley and go towards Wood Green. And indeed, by the time you got to Manor House, or the Nag's Head, where Pat knows very well, you ended up with the 259 coming behind you. And Pat will understand the fun in that. But it was really nice, because what you had loads of, at that time, it wasn't contractors that were doing the cleanings and stuff in the offices in London and the printing offices. It was ordinary people, ordinary ladies going to work, and very often they'd come and give you a sweet, or they'd give you maybe a biscuit, or they'd give you something, just to thank you, because you might have waited for them, or just that couple of seconds to give them a chance to get on the bus. That made such a difference sometimes, and they'd remember it as you would if you were left behind. You'd remember it forever. And then we did, obviously that was, and again, what you'd have in the evening time if you were on a late shift, because the shifts, you had an early, middle and late shift, and it was almost a 24-hour service. And in the evening, you'd have to, as you were leaving either King's Cross or Holborn, again, you never had to buy a paper in the morning, because all the printers were coming home, and they'd give you a bundle of papers, and you were king when you got to Finchley. You could hand them out. But the point was that, of course, you also had the meat market down there, and you had many people going down with their bags of meat, picking up their bags of meat and taking them home and putting them under the stairs. You had to tolerate that because it was part of people's life. And again, then in the evening time, you would have the ladies coming from the bingo. There was a big bingo hall on top of Caledonian Road. There's a prison a bit further down as well, which you take some people visiting there, or maybe take some prisoners who were let out for the day. And all those people talk to you. But when the bingo people come out, it was just absolutely, you just had to stand aside, let them on, and then hopefully there was a seat for them all. That was the fun part of it. Of course, on the 260s, there was very industrial. A lot of people going to the industries down Wilston, Harleston, North Acton, all that area, where there were large factories with lots of Irish people there. Whereas perhaps Finchley to Edgware, slightly different level of schools and stuff like that. So, but Finchley, the closure of Finchley was a big loss to Finchley. It was the biggest. Finchley Garage was the big, and it was a small garage in comparison to to Wood Green and to Holloway and Wilson and Cricklewood. But it was a big loss to them. It was the largest employer at Finchley when it closed, and it turned into a warehouse. And now the warehouse has been demolished, and they're going to start building houses there, which has just been demolished about 2 or 3 weeks ago. So that is the sort of history of that, and that come by privatization, which maybe we can just touch, because that had an adverse effect on everybody, and an adverse effect on the kind of social interaction we had between one another, because we were all the same. You see, no matter there was 70 something garages, 73 garages, I think, when I started, and you know, everybody you meet would tell you your garage was the best and it was the best place to work. Where of course they were all very much the same. They had the same conditions and the same rules and regulations, and that's basically how it worked.
Thanks, Tom. Yeah, a wonderful trip down memory lane there.
Actually, Tom, we have a question from somebody tuning in, saying that they used to regularly use the 260 bus going from school between Cricklewood and Harlesden in the 1960s. And she remembers that sometimes passengers and school children were very vocal. And she's wondering whether you think passengers behave any differently today, and were there any particular issues that you ever had did you have to police the bus in any way?
Well, of course, there was a lot of, if you're asking me, there was a lot of people travelling on the bus in those days. Buses were full, and when the schools come out, they were absolutely full. Yes, it was difficult for mums to get on at that particular time, and there was some problems. But what we did was we went into the schools and we talked to some of the children of some of the schools, about ourselves and the managers, to try and explain to them that it was dangerous to play about on the bus and not to go up and sit down, and you know, we managed it. That was the point, that you had to accept that school children, well, they were going to play about, weren't they? But what you did explain to them is they shouldn't open the windows, they shouldn't throw things out the windows, and they could cause trouble. And so we had some success with that, I think. Pat and Declan will probably explain better.
Yeah, they did. I mean, we did several school visits as part and parcel of that. But the other thing that happened was, and it's probably only in more recent times, I'd say the last 15, 18 years, that they developed a school bus network, which they put on special buses, particularly as schools amalgamated and were getting bigger, where there were quite a number of kids relying on public transport. So they put on special routes. They all began with the prefix 6, funny enough. So they'd have they duplicate some of the regular buses, but they'd be specifically for the kids coming out of school mainly, but also going to school, because kids used to go to school at different times, but coming out they were generally the same times. So these buses would be in position to take them, which took the pressure off the normal buses on those particular routes. But that's a relatively recent phenomenon.
Thank you, Declan. And Paddy, how about you? Did you experience any challenging situations as a conductor, as an inspector?
Yeah, I was listening to what Declan said about his time as a conductor, and I walked the 29s, and the 29s used to go from Enfield to start with, but from Green and DN to Victoria, and we used to go through Manor House, Finsbury Park, the Astoria, Finsbury Park, the Rainbow, Finsbury Park. We go on into Camden Town, and we had problems with Camden Town, especially on Friday and Saturday nights. If you were coming out of Camden Town on a late bus on a Friday or Saturday night after 10:30, you had a problem, because you could never, ever carry the amount of people that wanted to get on your buses. They were coming out of the pubs and clubs and they wanted to get on, and you couldn't stop people. That was it. As soon as you had 20 or 30 standing, that was it. You just press the bell and carry on, because you could stay there all night waiting for help to come, and you never got it. But the one thing I had, which makes me laugh, still makes me laugh, I was quite young on the buses and I didn't know certain things around. And a guy got on a Sunday at about 1:30 in Haringey. And he was absolutely dressed to the knuckles, but he had his fantastic suit on, the big white flares at the bottom, a beautiful white shirt on, and his hands, he could see he was working with his hands. They were really workers' hands. So he was probably working with Murphys or one of them, or builders. So he was half drunk, or more than half drunk. And he said to me, "Brighton, tell me when we get to Brighton." So I thought, well, we're not going to Brighton, we're going to Victoria. So I took him to Victoria, and I said, woke him up, he was asleep. You get the train from here to Brighton. So he looked around, he said, no, you, whatever he called me. He said, I mean the Brighton pub in Camden Town. So I'd taken him all the way past Camden Town to Victoria to go to Brighton, and he actually wanted the Brighton pub. But there was often things like that. But I could imagine the trouble we had with schools was mostly the trouble I had with schools, especially as a gold badge in Iran, was the schools that had, the good schools always had the most problems when they were let out. Because whilst they were in school, the control was in the school and it was brilliant. As soon as they got out, they just had a release. They were free, and then they behaved a little bit differently. But it was never bad. I mean, the worst was when they broke up. They would probably take steal an inkwell from school, and then they'd rip a seat open and take the sponge out and start making these balls of ink and pinging them at different people on the bus. That was the worst we used to get when we used to have to take the bus off and have it cleaned. But yes, like Declan, I visited several schools and would advise them that by their actions, they were basically costing the bus to be taken off the road for half a day or whatever. And I'm not sure it worked, but we were trying to do our bit and try to educate them as well. But yes, it changed as has been said. Once the school buses came in, that changed. That took the pressure off the main route. And of course, they were totally responsible then, because that was their bus. And if anything happened on it, it was their problem.
A funny story, Mary, about what Pat was talking about was that about decent schools. One of our local schools, actually local to me where I live now, because my kids went there themselves, was St. James's Catholic School in Burdock, and they were the same. They came out in numbers and wasn't through badness, it was just through boisterousness more than anything else, but causing problems. So after people visited the school, they said they would they'd send out teachers to supervise the bus stops when buses came along. One of the first days I came along, I was working on Route 52 at the time as a conductor, came up to this stop and saw these 150 kids. The supervision was a little nun. She was about 4'6", and I'd say she was about 60 years old. Not a chance. They just walked and ran over her like she wasn't there. It felt sorry for her, really. They tried, but it didn't work.
Thank you. We have a question from somebody listening in who is commenting on the fact that around the kind of time that you all were arriving in London and working with the buses, there were a lot of people coming from Ireland working in construction in the UK. And the question is about whether you feel that within the bus sector, the environment was more diverse, whether you had more opportunities to mix with people from different backgrounds, and perhaps in the construction industry. Do you think that it was easier in that sense to integrate, to make friends with people from different parts of the community in London? So let's ask, let's start with Tom again.
I think that's true, and that there were a number of people actually who from the construction industry who worked with us in the winter time. And they would work in the winter and then move off for the summer and actually go back into the construction industry again for the summer. So it was a question of choice, but the difference I would say, and you know, the benefits of working for London Transport were quite considerate in the sense that you had the pay wasn't probably all that good as such, the basic pay, but you had what they call average rostered earnings, because you had the opportunity of working other hours, and you had spread overs, and you had all sorts of extra payments. You had extra payments for Saturday, extra payments for Sunday. You had indeed ended up and working 5 hours for Boxing Day for 15 hours pay. So there was all sorts of extras that were in there. So you might have an average pay, for instance, of maybe, you know, £20 when we started, 14 to £20 when we started, but the average rostered earnings might have been 30 because you were working there. But you had all the extra benefits as well while you were there. You had sick pay, you had holiday pay, you had rotating holidays. So you had quite a number of benefits that you wouldn't perhaps have in the construction industry at that particular time. It might have improved, but and of course, again, I mentioned the pensions, but the pension final salary pension scheme and it probably still is the best in England, and in fact certainly the best in London. I think that at one stage the British Rail pension was slightly better, but British Rail is no longer British Rail as we know it, and of course London Transport is not as we know it, as we knew it. It's now Transport for London, and there's a massive difference because it's privatised. But there's the pension, the fact that if you worked on the buses, you could go, and probably every bus driver that I know was able to buy themselves a house. As the wages improved and benefits improved, they were able to buy a house because it was a reliable job. Pay at the end of the day, you knew, and you could get a mortgage on it, whereas in other industries you couldn't. And that's I think the main, and of course we met up with so many different nationalities. We had the Africans and West Indians were there before us, but after that we had the Cuimhne nations and the Uganda nations, and they were some of those people were very, very intelligent people. They had really good jobs where they were, but they had to come over here. They were forced to leave their countries and come over here, and obviously working on the buses was a bit of a downgrade for them, but they all worked with us and were very friendly, and I think that was the difference of where you actually went to work. And you had shift work, I know, and it was long, but nevertheless you had a uniform, you had all those benefits that Patrick mentioned in the beginning about the welfare and the society. You had the Manor House Hospital, for instance. You could go there, you paid a couple of pence a week, and you had access to that for everything, from dentistry to operations. So all those benefits were of help. That you wouldn't have if you went on the building side, because you'd probably end up having to do your negotiations down the pub as to whether you got the job the next day or not. And we saw, as we went along as a conductor or a driver, people just waiting outside, waiting to be picked up on different days of the week, waiting to be picked up with building contractors. So I don't think that they were equal in any way. Anyway, that's just my opinion.
Thank you. Moving to Pat. Pat, were there people from particular parts of Ireland that you met through the buses? Were people from all different counties in Ireland? Or where, in terms of your Irish colleagues, which parts of Ireland did they come from?
Could you say that again, please?
I'm interested to ask about the different counties in Ireland that people came across from to work with the buses. Did you have colleagues, Irish colleagues from different parts of Ireland, or were they from the same sorts of areas?
You know, I'm not sure. We did have 3 or 4 people that came from Dublin, which was surprising because you said, why the hell are you here? Why didn't you stay in Dublin? Because there was more opportunities in Dublin probably than any other parts of Ireland. But no, I didn't have many people where I worked from Limerick. There was people there from all over the country, different counties. Nothing specific, no specific county. It was just spread. And you know, you got to a state where if somebody said, "Where are you from?" you say Ireland, because at that time there could be. There was defining Ireland, and there was people saying, I'm an Irishman, and I'm an Irishman who comes from Ireland, which is the 32 counties of Ireland. And I don't want to differentiate between that. I've joined the London Irish Bowls Association back in the 60s, 70s. and it's a bowls association. And the guys who were running it then, there was 2 Northern Ireland guys. I never asked, did they go to the same church as me or not? As far as I was concerned, I was socializing with Irishmen, and I got great fun out of that. And that's where a lot of people kept that part of their background to themselves. It didn't matter. An Irishman was an Irishman. It didn't matter what church you went to. It was accepted. The bit that I think, I mean, again, it wasn't mentioned in North London. There was the Transport Catholic Guild that met at the Irish Centre, I think once every 2 months. That was a good thing for people who probably were losing their faith and not going to church. The guild gave them something else as a kind of a guide to maybe what they should be looking at and what they should be going to. They opened up, because it was so popular, they opened up another section of it at St. Ignatius in Stamford Hill. So there was lots of things happening that was good for the Irish. I mean, I went to the Gresham. I never found a woman there that would take me on. And it was only when I was playing football that a friend of mine had a girlfriend, and she brought a friend of hers, and she saw me, and she didn't like me the first time she saw me, but we met again. And believe it or not, we're celebrating our 50th anniversary in 2 or 3 weeks' time. So I've managed to get a woman who an English woman, in actual fact, who took a liking to me. So I was quite happy there. When people used to have a go at me about being Irish in England, I used to say, I cannot say one bad word against the English. How could I? I came here, you gave me a job, you gave me one of your women, you educated my children, you gave me a house. I think this country is brilliant. And it has been to me. Absolutely brilliant.
Thank you, Paddy. I'm going to move now to Declan, but with a different question. So somebody listening in has said how she loves, losing my voice, loves the fact that you married your conductor, somebody that you worked with. And she was interested to know whether you were paired in general, were people paired with the same conductor every day? How did the matching of colleagues on the buses work?
Yeah, well, we were both conductors, and what happened was that, yeah, you generally worked with the same driver all the time on a rota basis. But in the garage, they were pretty good to us. They generally tried to arrange our shifts so we'd be on the same sort of shifts, and particularly rest days. The shifts weren't all that important, but rest days, probably having the same days off were probably most important. I mean, sometimes it was good, sometimes it was bad, because my passion is football, and it suited me for her to be working when I wanted to be away somewhere. So yeah, it worked both ways, to be honest. But yeah, there was a lot of couples actually working in garages at the time, and both West Indian and Irish particularly. I can remember several of them working at Wilson. A lot of them now used to work as driver and conductor, so they'd work together all the time. But there were others who were a driver and conductor, but they worked with different people. And there were others who were laterally then, when women became drivers, they were drivers, their husband were drivers, and which was very similar to when we were both conductors in terms of the shift working. But yeah, it worked okay. I mean, we never sort of went from one end of the month to the other without seeing each other, that sort of thing.
Thank you, Declan. Going to come back to Tom. Tom, you were heavily involved with the union. Can you talk about the makeup of the union? Were there, again, people from diverse backgrounds joining the union? Were there many Irish union members? Did everybody join the union? How did that work?
Well, when we joined the union, it was part of your contract of employment. It was what they called the closed shop, and everybody joined the union. And the union was the main negotiating vehicle to get any change whatsoever. You had to go through the union to do that. What you had locally, of course, was the local branch in each of the garages, and you had a secretary, chair, and representative, and you had a convener who would run the various companies who did the some other negotiations and attended the various committees. And you had a weekly branch meeting where anybody who had a problem come and made their statement and discussed whatever the problem was. And sometimes there were minor problems, and sometimes like whether the toilets were clean, and whether there was, facilities for ladies, and whether there was a restroom. All those sort of things had to win through the union, and you had the rep had a meeting every Friday with the garage manager, and tried to get some of these things sorted out. Obviously, some of them didn't, but in the main, they were all sorted out locally, because it was very much everybody was on the same level. There wasn't any class distinction, because if you had a problem, you tried to get it resolved. And the union was very helpful to people who had problems, particularly Irish people, for instance, who may have a sudden call that somebody died in Ireland. They would have to go over there, and the union would help to pay the fare. As you try to book a flight at that time, it was quite expensive if you didn't have time to do it, and that the union would help you with that. And obviously there was a loan club as well in the garage linked to the trade union, and so there was help from that area. Centrally, the union would do the main negotiations. There was one company, London Transport, and the union would do that. It would take weeks and days, and a bit dramatic. It would drag out till late at night, but it would eventually get solved for all the different groups. But of course, when it got privatized, then in fact, I think there's something like about 12 companies now, but there were about 15 when it got privatized, and negotiations were done with those companies. And so there was a massive change and massive differences, because they were competing against one another, the various companies. And so that put some pressure on different, bodies and how they work. But the union in particular, obviously with Margaret Thatcher changing the rules and as it went on, then people had the right to join or not to join. Invariably, most people, and while I was there, and anyway, my experience was, and I think that was the same in the garages that I know around, the vast majority of the people remained members of the union, and because that was how they saw their way, and that was how they got things done, if you like. Obviously, there might be a special, but everything was negotiated, everything was brought back to the members, and the members have served as the most democratic, especially, and I say this, especially in the bus side, because we had a bus section. We had a Transport and General Works Union bus section, and that bus section looked after the bus people, and they were all bus people, right up to the General Secretary. They were all ex-bus people, and so they knew if you raised something, they knew what you were talking about. And there was obviously a difference for the managerial staff got different negotiators, but in the end of the day, we would sit down, have a discussion, have an argument maybe, and it would go on for a long time to get things done. Eventually we might get it resolved. My record was to get a settlement for St. Patrick's Day. Because both sides wanted to pop down and have a pint in the afternoon. But seriously, sometimes it would go on till Christmas. It was that kind of thing. So although unions might have a bad name for having disputes and that, on the bus side in general terms, and my two colleagues would probably agree, that there wasn't all that many strikes and conflicts. What we did was sat down and sorted the thing out and I would say in a family kind of way. Okay.
Thank you very much, Tom, and thank you to Paddy and thank you to Declan. The hour has gone very, very quickly, We would love to invite you back for another session sometime. It's been so interesting to hear your stories and experiences and jokes as well. Thank you to everybody who's asked questions through the chat. There's many more questions that we had that we would like to ask, and we would like to create on our Irish in Britain websites, where we have space for reminiscence materials, a section around the experiences of transport workers, Irish migrant transport workers in coming to Britain, and it will be great and very welcome for anybody tuning in who may have photographs or memories that they may be willing to share, to contact us through Irish in Britain. We'd love to hear from you. As just before we close, we would like also to acknowledge as well the role that bus workers have been playing during the pandemic as frontline workers, and to thank well, to give our appreciation for often frontline workers are often recognised as the people that work in hospitals and so on, and perhaps we hear less about those who support the services or the transport that enables people to get to hospitals to do their work, and to acknowledge the disproportionate number of people that have lost their life as bus workers during the pandemic. So we wanted to mention that at the end. We'd like to warmly welcome, as we said, anybody joining newly today. Maybe this is your first Irish in Britain event, and to encourage you to tune in to our Thoughtful Thursday session next week, where we'll be having a completely different topic, talking about the Herbert Protocol, with guests from the police talking about the support that is out there to support family members and friends who want to put things into place so that if family members living with dementia go missing, they can be found quickly and safely. So thank you very much for joining us all, and thank you also to Mary for your questions as well, and we hope to see you next week.
Thank you very much. Thanks everyone.
Thank you all.
Thanks.
Thank you all.
Thank you all.
Thanks. Great to see you all. Thanks very much. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. Thanks, Declan.
Yes. See you soon.
Yeah. Bye bye.
Yes, with the help of God. Yeah.
Thank you.